people that can't. Just again, I will introduce Dr. Lorne Schussel, who is going to be the person speaking today. And we are reviewing then his chapter 5 of our AAPS volume 2, which was called Expanding Science. And here's just a bit of an introduction about Lorne's background. Lorne, you're an adjunct assistant professor and core faculty at the Spirituality Mind Body Insitute at Columbia University Teachers College. And I believe you're working with Lisa Miller, who is there as well. And she is on our board of directors of the AAPS. And you are the research director of the Contemplative Science and Post-Materialism Lab, as well as the PI of the Contemplative Neuroscience and Connectivity Project. And your research focuses on the utilization of contemplative practices, human connectivity, contemplative neuroscience, EEG hyperscanning, you can tell us about that, and integrating clinical biomarkers into treatment. And so again, I'm going to be interviewing Lorne on his chapter 5 called Cosmic Connections Toward a Post-Materialist Science of the Self. And so, Lorne, welcome again. And here's my first question for you. So could you begin by telling us more about that relationship you mentioned in your chapter between Wolfgang Pauli, the Nobel Prize winning quantum physicist, and Carl Jung, our groundbreaking psychoanalyst? And you say in your chapter that it reflects the synthesis between the outer material and the inner psychological worlds. So I would ask, what interesting new ideas came out of their time and their work together? What did you mention in the chapter? Go ahead.
Oh, hi. I just say hi to everyone first. Actually, I was wondering just before we do the chapter, if it's all right, we just do close our eyes for a second and just listen to the sound, just to kind of ground ourselves in a inner state. And I think this will also answer the question. So I hope I'll accomplish two things with this. Okay. So if everyone can just close your eyes, and the sound doesn't come so great through sometimes, so just listen. You don't hear the sound perfectly, listen to the sound of nature underneath it. So everyone close your eyes. We'll listen to the sound as long as we can hear it. Open your eyes when you're ready. Just to ground ourselves in this sound in a sense that's beyond reality. And I think that may come up in the kind of finale of the discussion about the chapter, what it means to just listen to the sound and the inner sound. So just a little background, I just wanted to say, so my professional role is both a researcher, professor, and I'm a clinical psychologist. And I co-wrote the chapter with John Spencer, who writes in the philosophy of physics. So one of my inspirations for the chapter is actually what Marjorie just asked about the relationship between Jung and Pauli. And I thought it was fascinating. It's something I had no idea at all, that they even had a relationship. And in a sense, this relationship, the famous physicist who was nominated for the Nobel Prize by Einstein for the inclusion principle, and Jung is obviously, I think everyone knows Jung, famous psychologist of the last century. So they had a relationship, and I didn't realize it wasn't just a professional relationship, it was a therapeutic relationship, which I found to be fascinating. And that therapeutic relationship informed theories, or some of Jung's theories, namely synchronicity. So just a little background on Pauli. So Pauli, famous physicist, did great in the material world, so to say. Many accomplishments. The Nobel Prize, I would say, is the pinnacle of accomplishments in the materialist, reductionist world. The greatest accolade one can get in humanity, science, and achievement. But that doesn't mean so you could say his external world was doing great, but doesn't mean his inner world was doing great. Pauli had many psychological problems. And these problems began with his parents. His mother had committed suicide. His father, and it was because his father had cheated on her, and devastating effect of Pauli. He was suffering.
Oh, you shut it for the noise.
Sorry, somebody's in. I hear someone's background.
Maybe a couple.
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
You can mute
okay.
yourselves if you want. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So Pauli's mother, she had committed suicide, and Pauli himself was having a very fractured, ruptured relationship with his own wife, who was a cabaret dancer. His wife ended up cheating on him. And I think the man he cheated with was not what you would think it would be, someone outside the sciences, but it was actually a chemist. And I think that was a big, physicists frown on chemists. I don't know if that's true. I read that. Maybe a gentleman here can answer. But it was like a big hurt to his ego in many respects. And so he was seeking psychotherapy treatment. Initially, Jung had said he should see a woman therapist to deal with his issues with women. He started with a woman therapist, and eventually there was some interpretation and some good, but it led back to Jung himself. And Jung helped him interpret, in my chapter I say 400 dreams, but I think it was as much as 1,200 dreams. And the dreams were very vivid and detailed. And together, through the dreams, Jung's actually gained a better understanding of physics and quantum physics, which is the deeper understanding of reality. And Jung himself was seeking an explanation of that. And so the point is that there's two processes happening. One is a physicist who's trying to understand the deepest explanation of reality in the material physical sense. And then a psychologist who's trying to understand the deepest aspect of reality from the inner sense, from the sense of thought and shared thought throughout the history of time. I think them coming together is extremely powerful. And that's where the term synchronicity came about. And it was through the interpretation of Pauli's dreams. In the dreams, sometimes there was these notions of quaternity. And one particular dream was a vision that Pauli had of something known as the cosmic clock or the world clock. Now, according to Pauli, this helped him understand the structure of the hydrogen atom and the nature of matter. I don't know if it led to the exclusion principle, maybe it did. But he was gaining insight into the reality of nature through dreams. Jung, through these notions of quaternity, he modeled the causality. One of the quaternities that Jung had modeled was space and time being separate elements, and also causality and synchronicity. Pauli helped him interpret this image, but he put space and time together. And I think they both understood synchronicity being the connection of events beyond the known notion of a causal reality. So not the non-billiard ball universe, the acausal and the connected. And it's a powerful term, and we use it in day-to-day, especially in this field, where things are just connected without explanation. But perhaps this connection is quantum entanglement. And that's one of the concepts brought into the paper. And I think in a sense, it becomes both a materialist explanation, but also just a metaphor for connectivity beyond a reductionist model, which, I mean, I do try to sequence a reductionist model. Not being a physicist, I don't know if it's going to fill all the gaps, but I think in a sense, it starts to give a possibility, and it's a philosophical reach where we start to see that we are maybe connected beyond the notions of connection, such in a way of synchronicity. In so many words, the Pauli and Jung coming together is the meeting of the inner and the outer mind. And when they meet, it's a very powerful balance, and maybe we see reality differently. So that's.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think, in fact, you began to allude to what was going to be my next question too, which is, could you describe for us the work you discuss in your chapter about the scientific evidence that the universe is entangled? So what do we know from quantum physics, et cetera, about that?
What's interesting is I have a quote in my chapter from Schrodinger, and you think that Schrodinger would be you think about a lot of these quantum physicists would be purely materialistic, but actually in some of his work, I don't know if I think it's Mind and Matter where he works, he quotes the Bhagavad Gita. He says, hence the life of yours, which you are living, is not merely a piece of the entire existence, but it is in a certain sense the whole. Tats samasi. This is you. I am in the east, I am in the west, I am below and above, I am this whole world. So in this sense, the one becomes the many. And then what is this notion of our interconnective nature? So it begins with 1935, the Einstein-Rosen-Pulaski paradox. The first concept of entanglement appears in that paper, where two commuters can be connected at a distance. What is this third commuter? Direct quote from the paper. Later, I'll talk about neuroscience experiments, but Mick Goswami, who's also an author in the second volume, he's the last author on the paper which tries to put into neuroscience terms the Einstein-Rosen-Pulaski paradox and an experimental paradigm for neuroscience. And he did that paper in 1996. But the notion is that based in quantum entanglement, and how did quantum entanglement development after the Einstein-Rosen-Pulaski paradox? 30 years later, there's Bell's theorem, which tries to theorize the distal connection. I can't do it justice to say exactly how Bell theorized the theorem, but in so many words that if these particles at a distance are correlated to a point above 66%, then there could possibly be spooky action at a distance, which is the notion of Einstein's theory in 1935. And it's all just theory until it's experimentally validated. In 1981 to 1983, Alan Aspect, a French physicist, experimentally validates quantum entanglement, looking at excited calcium atoms to produce photons. I do describe the experiment in the paper. My description is actually based on one of Mick Goswami's descriptions of the experiment. And in so many words, particles are shot in separate directions, manipulated through photocrystals, photosplitters maybe. One particle is manipulated, and the phenomena is that the second particle has the exact same spin as the first particle. This is way above 50%, and it reaches in modern experiments, which there's many replications of this, and the fidelity is 90+% in a lot of the experiments. So one particle can be manipulated, the spin can be manipulated in several ways, and the corresponding particle has a identical shift, very high fidelity. So it's the basis for modern quantum entanglement experimentation. An interesting experiment. It was one of the first drafts, but there was an experiment done in Austria under the Danube River through a sewer. And that experiment, the outcomes were 84, 86, and 90% fidelity for the manipulated spin. Remarkable. And then now becoming a new frontier of science. And then the implications are immeasurable. And it goes even beyond just manipulating the spin of one particle to another. But manipulating a spin one or the other is important because it creates a bit of information, 0-1 data, known as a qubit. Very powerful. Some believe will one day create a quantum computer. I think they're already trying to build one, but many nodes of 0-1s, is enough to create cascades of information, quantum computer. And it's much more powerful because it's much more complicated and easier energy-wise. So we can produce logarithmic increases in computing power, which computing power, one of the greatest fostering aspects of innovation. So
Great, thank you.
up there, yeah.
Yes, and then you're then introducing our next question too by talking about quantum computers, and that you also talked about the brain being used as at least as a concept. They talk about the brain as possibly a quantum computer. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on this. I think you talked about evidence for biophotons, photonic activity within biological processes and things like that. So when somebody talks about that concept of the brain as a quantum computer, what are they really thinking about?
Right. So we have the neuronal doctrine, which says the brain is this composite electrochemical computer, right? It's broken down mechanics. It's just simply the sum of its parts, an electrochemical summation. There is no emergent system. There is no consciousness necessarily. So what's interesting about entanglement is that it extends at a distance beyond the proximity, beyond the locality. It's a non-local process. So if the brain is just, we're looking at it as electrochemicals, but it's also composed of photons, which is, part of these experiments. And I guess one reach is that if all these experiments are based on photons and the brain itself exhibits the release of photons, there's evidence of photon release in rat brains. There's a whole field of biophotonics where biological processes do release photons, which are small packets of light energy. This research was done by Pop in the 1960s and 70s. It's not widespread, but it's beginning to use for biological signaling. One example of biophoton research is tumors. So actually, any kind of oxidative process with oxidative stress releases more photons. So tumors, believe it or not, release very large amount of photons. There's perhaps a lot of stress going on in that part of the system. Damaged leaves will release photons. Any kind of damaged form of biology releases more photons. Pythagoras said we're beings of light, so many years ago, and perhaps we do have light, which is released, and that energy, the light energy, can be indicative of certain biological processes. Now, there's argument whether it's a byproduct or it's a signaling process, and I think there's some papers which discuss that. I won't get into that. I would argue it's a signaling process, not a byproduct necessarily. And there's actually Gary Schwartz did an interesting healing experiment with biophotons, which hasn't been replicated. I could talk about that later. It was fascinating. So in so many words, on first step, if these photons are being entangled and the biological processes, biophotons are being released in the body, even in brain cells, then to what degree are we a field? And we could be talking paradigms out where we actually understand that, because we can't really even understand thought, like specific thoughts. Like we have all this research on EEG and we just understand states, but we don't actually understand cognition to its core, like what are specific cognitions or sequences of cognition. So as far as I understand, we just understand states to a degree. To what degree our thoughts are organization of photons to some level, and how are those connected to other organizations of photons at a distance? In the same way we have photons, spooky action at a distance, connected to each other. So how are we, and then it plays into all of the phenomenology of psi research, where we do have these intuitive experiences where somebody's connected to us, or we do have intuitive experiences of healing. I just had this synchronicity. I felt you were going to call and you called. To what degree were those two, collective organizations of photons connected at a distance through some kind of form of entanglement? And then you could say, well, there's no evidence of that, but actually, and also you could also say that it has to be super cool. These experiments are in, absolute zero, and it can't be done outside of that. Does that lead to your next question?
Well, I mean, in a certain sense, but I'm going to actually maybe jump to it because you just brought up to the idea of entanglement between persons. And you do mention also experiments on twins and what appears to be entanglement in the consciousness of twins. And maybe you can say a little bit more about that. I think Larry Dossey has also written a lot about that in some of his books as well.
So I'll talk about twins. Before I jump to twins,
Yeah, sure.
I'll talk a little bit about diamonds.
Oh, good. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So go ahead and talk about
skip because it couldn't, basically the evidence is so far, and it's all like kind of a philosophical reach, because can we really prove anything, right? So we're just playing with ideas here. Like, what is some of this fascinating research, which in a sense is fringe, which is sad. You know, we're only having like 5 to 10 studies maybe. But it's fascinating because where do we go? Like, what do we tackle? What do we go for? So outside of absolute zero photons, there's actually research on clouds of, and these are individual photons and individual ions, but wouldn't it work when we have to see bigger groups, like macro globules of particles? So there's research with rubidium atoms, and there's research for entanglement between groups of rubidium atoms and cesium clouds. And so that was like very intriguing. And there's multiple studies in multi-particle systems. And then there's research on diamonds. And the rubidium atoms, they actually did at high temperatures. So that gets rid of the absolute zero brain has to be super cooled idea. But the temperatures were raised. So there's evidence of entanglement at room temperature and above room temperature. And there was 2 or 3 studies on diamonds. And the diamonds were entangled. I think the diamonds were entangled through a laser. That laser is highly coherent, so it makes sense that could create entanglement. I like to think of meditation as just a side thought that, you know, we come together in a state of coherence through meditation, and that's a powerful form of connection where we all become coherent, because there is research on brain coherence and meditation. That's some of the early TM research, where transcendental meditation created neurocoherence. And I have my own research with meditation and EEG has a finding for brain coherence with EEG. So in so many words, there has been evidence for multi-particle systems and coherence. There has been evidence for macro-entanglement, so actual substances being entangled, diamonds. So much of our body has crystal lattices in it. Even water has crystalline components. So these are all philosophical conjecture to how is it believable that we are connected, and within a physical explanation, which would be purely reductionist and materialistic, you know. And then the reach is the post-materialism, which is almost the philosophy and the vitalism of it. So that's it for that.
Good. And so now getting back then to the experiments on twins, for example, and possible entanglement between people, for example, like twins. What do we know about that?
Right. So then there's been maybe 10 to 15 studies maximum on neural entanglement with actually individuals. And most of the experiments use EEG. So actually, Amikwaswamy did the first experiment in 1996, or he was the last author on the experiment. I'm sorry, the first author is slipping my name, slipping my mind. The experiment was with using a photic stimulator, and which is basically light flashing at a certain frequency. There was 2 groups of people. The groups of people were brought together, and they were yoked with a feeling presence meditation. Even there's a loving kindness component. They were separated, magnetically shielded rooms. Light was flashed to one group, and meanwhile both and they're pairs. A light was flashed to one in a pair, and there was correlated effect in the other person beyond chance. Mm-hmm. So how are they? This is one of the first experiments of distal connectivity, and I think it was parietal theta power was what they were looking at for the connection. there was a number of other studies that replicated the effect. Persinger looked at siblings, and he had the siblings have an imagined feeling presence. They also separated them in magnetically shielded rooms, and they flashed. I don't actually, this wasn't a flashing of light. It was just during moments of feeling presence. They looked for correlated spikes in EEG in the corresponding partner, and there was correlated spikes. It was replicated again with strangers, so non-siblings who were also a feeling presence group and a non-feeling presence group. The feeling presence group had correlated spikes. There's a study by Wackerman in early 2000s, which had a null result. Using one of those, the null result still had a result, which was interesting. So the null result was for using the meditation, like using the feeling presence meditation, but there actually was a finding of distal connectivity, and it was perhaps just through the experiment in itself. So an experimenter effect based distal connection. So beyond using like some kind of yoking mechanism, Persinger looked at a magnetic field by itself. So they radiated. I don't know the nature of the magnetic field that was used. You'd have to look at Persinger's research if you have that question. But they irradiated people with the magnetic field and separated them and flashed a light or did the feeling presence. And there was also, based on a magnetic field, a correlated spike in the other person. Beyond actual people, there was groups of cells that were separated and magnetically shielded, and light was flashed. They were irradiated with a magnetic field, and a photic stimulation was given to one group of cells. And believe it or not, even though they were magnetically shielded, the flashlight was given to one and not the other. The other group, and this is with control groups, the other group had a spike that was significantly different than the control. It was correlated to the flashlight in the other group. So there's maybe some kind of distal connection happening, and the question is why and how, and can we continue to replicate it, and can we continue to explore it and understand it? Yeah.
And so we're about at 20 minutes before the hour, and I want to give everybody else time to ask questions. So I'm going to wait on some of my other questions and just see if there are other people here that have some questions for you too. I know Vasileios, again, a physicist, maybe any of the rest of you that want to ask questions now can, otherwise I'll go on with my questions.
May I?
Yeah.
I don't have any questions. I have praise for the paper, and I really enjoyed the lecture. It was right on the spot, and I was all the time inside me. I was going, yes, yes, yes. So yeah, I'm full of happy feelings for this. 2 or 3 just comments. One is that there's the entanglement story, and Pauli is I came to love the character, the man, the personality, but at the same time, kind of because of compassion. He was just a desperate and miserable person, although a brilliant physicist, and he was the one who stopped the entanglement hypothesis, although he wanted it to have it. He found a little wrong thing. He criticized a paper by von Neumann and De Breuil, and he killed all this research on entanglement. And then many years afterwards, Bohm picked up where Schrödinger has been criticized by Pauli, and there defend the thesis of the hidden potential, the outfold infold thing, unfolded. They call it the quantum potential. And then it was a time where Bohm brought up the subject, and Bell very strongly, innovatively, very creatively, but against his job. He was not supposed to do this job at CERN. that was his weekend passion to prove the non-locality of things. And then there's also a huge underground community, mainly in California, the hippies. There's a very nice book that I strongly recommend, How Hippies Saved Physics, where they brought, this is a very wonderful book, and how they brought up, Safrati is one of the main characters there, another very, very amazing character. And they brought back the idea of entanglement, and in a kind of ironic setup of physics history, there were these people who brought up the quantum revolution, the second quantum revolution of information, quantum information and all that. But again, all these people were kind of ignored, and technology picked up the second quantum information revolution. The same was with the first quantum information. I mean, all of them, Schrödinger, Wigner, Jordan, there are people who have been devoting themselves to what we will now call parapsychological research. And they somehow, the things were smoothed up. Even the Pauli effect, the effect that Pauli would come into a laboratory and would destroy things, that was also censored from Wikipedia, for example, or for other sources. And there's another thing that, again, is kind of being shielded away, is animal communication. And I'm happy that Laurel is here, that the pigeons are entangled with the magnetic field. I think the bees also. Oh, yeah. And animals find their way through constellations. How easy it is to believe that they can read the constellations and not being somehow entangled by another means. And this is a kind of reductionistic stronghold. They have to see something. They see the constellations. Okay, and we buy that. We cannot buy that they have a feeling or a sixth sense or that. Anyway, I'm very enthusiastic, and thank you for the presentation.
Yes, I think that you do make an interesting point about many of these things that also Rupert Sheldrake is studying too, with animal communication, both with people and animals, and all of his pigeon work. And I think that I love the fact that he's trying to do very careful experiments that don't require some special laboratory. But as he was saying, I think it was one with the pigeons where they were on this moving boat, which was their home, and they could move the boat and they would still find exactly where it was to come back to. It's like, as you say, there's a fascinating aspect of entanglement. Hey, Lauren, do you have any more to say?
Yeah, I think the pigeon's very interesting. So for one reason, one of the papers I came across, there was actually a theoretical paper suggesting that quantum teleportation could be possible, and they cited pigeons and pigeons being related to the magnetic field. But just the personal issue is, yesterday I just saved a pigeon.
Synchronicity.
And I'm actually, after this lecture, I'm going to rush to an animal hospital to bring it to an animal hospital. And I just it was a weird event. I don't know how this event occurred. And it was like this pigeon. I was driving my car, and this pigeon, it wasn't moving at all. It was a baby pigeon, and I got out of the car and I was thinking, oh, this thing's not going to make it, and it was just barely waddling away. And I talked to my wife, and I was like, I have to do something about this. And we call these animal things, and then somehow we figured out what to do. We got a box, and then we saved the pigeon. And now I have a pigeon. I put it water and birdseed, and I have a pigeon in my bathroom right now as we're speaking. And I'm waiting to get done with this lecture so I can rush to go take this pigeon to an animal hospital. So I'm really going to think about pigeons after this and quantum entanglement.
And the other thing is chlorophyll. Sorry to interrupt. Chlorophyll and photosynthesis is something which most of the people.
I'm going to send you this paper because it cites both photosynthesis and pigeons being connected to magnetic fields as evidence.
Photosynthesis is proven even to the hardcore deniers of that they are the plants are doing this kind of entangled chemical reactions without any effort since billions of years. Again, it's very, very upsetting because we are supposed to build quantum computers isolated from everything.
Yes, and I think what you're reminding me about, both of you, is hearing Larry Dossey talk and reading his book, One Mind, where he talks about these twins. I think this was one that was actually in Spain, Vasileios, where the one twin was burned badly. I think it was like on an iron or something at home, and her twin sister had gone off to visit her grandmother in another town. And just at that time, this giant swelling comes up on her own arm in the other town, exactly when the first one was burned. And again, talk about quantum entanglement or entanglement of some sort. It's phenomenal. And I think the sad part is that those things that happen naturally are called anecdotes, and we are told we can't trust them when there are so many of them. It's unbelievable. Yes. Well, and that brings me up one more question for you, Lorne, from me, and that is that I know that in our book that's about to come out, where you also have a chapter, an essay, you talked about your own sort of what we might call your own spiritual awakening or unfoldment related to your own self-healing. And maybe you could, would it be possible just to hear it like briefly about that, what happened to you?
Oh, yeah, sure. I could share that. Yeah, so I was, how to describe that experience. So I had, I learned a healing technique, and I was starting to practice healing, pranic healing. I got really into spirituality. It was my late teenagers, early 20s. And I was one day, which part of it, the healing, the healing or the experience of perception? Which one?
Well, why don't you do the healing and then the perception, or vice versa? I don't care, but I just remember from the chapter. So go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I had this experience of perception, and I was trying to see beyond the physical reality. I was just interested, like this. I was speaking to this artist who's a close family member. He was saying that he has this ability to see beyond physical realities, these auras, and I just didn't even understand what that meant. And I think that I've been doing experiments with him, though, with that, where he could, see my aura during different periods of thinking, and I thought it was just an extension of visual perception, to the point where it's extrasensory. An artist practices so many times to see something, and their visual acuity is so attuned that the brain develops a way to see beyond the physical reality in such a way that a sensor gets stronger over time, or the brain's muscle of sensing becomes stronger and becomes a sensing device which sees beyond electromagnetic spectrum to total energy. Eyes evolved in the visual spectrum. There's also people who have evolved more rods and cones, tetrachromats, who can see more colors. It's a possible biological explanation. But then just the idea of practice makes perfect, and artist just tends to see more. So he was seeing cognition in the form of, we can call it an aura, but I think let's not limit ourselves with terms, right? He's seeing beyond perception of reality. So I said, I'm going to practice this idea, and I was practicing drawing my hand for months and months and months. I was just and I was just looking at the depth of the hand, the structure of the hand, the energy of the hand. One day I was reading a forum on Kundalini awakening experiences. It's kind of scary. It's actually Deepak Chopra was talking. He was involved in this forum, and it was these like scary experiences. So I just, in that moment, I had this like extremely powerful thing happened, where I felt this like intense energy coming from my spine, and then I saw my whole body radiating in flames, maybe 3 feet above my head, and then I was looking at my hand, maybe 2-3 feet above my hand. Sorry. And it lasted maybe 30-40 seconds, and I was just trying to understand what the nature of this experience. I sourced the experience, and I was doing healing with people and having like these experiences and helping people with problems. Actually, there's a passage in the Sutras of Patanjali. Sutras of Patanjali documents yogic powers or yogic siddhis. So it actually is a taxonomy of the phenomenology of these experiences, which is made in maybe 7th to 9th century. It's used in yoga studios, but there's actually, it's the siddhis. Siddhis are yogic powers, and each passage is a yogic siddhi. And so one of the passages is the effulgence of light that you experience through energy. So I traced, and it was about being on fire. So I traced that passage to this yogic experience. And the yogic cities are passing experiences. They're fleeting. They happen, and then you may have another one, you may not. It's just something that happens through a spiritual transformation process. So actually related to that, the finale of the chapter is a quote from Froelich, who actually did research on coherence, biological coherence, which is fascinating. And would you like to ask that question?
He's leading me into the last question, which we have just 9 minutes for. That's perfect. So I said you also mentioned the dreams of Froelich into what we call the subatomic realm. And this is what you said. You say, in the creative process, quoting him now, of thinking, his mind goes out from his human frame and becomes the physical particle and field situation, feeling directly how they tend to behave. He would then use mathematical techniques. Is that right? Yes, he would then, he would then use mathematical techniques both to capture this unknown situation and as an anchor so the mind can return to his own brain or everyday personality. So it was like he went into the particle itself, understood the particle from the inside, and then came out to actually create the mathematical techniques to explain that. So I said, this is a fascinating experience, and I'm wondering how many scientists and other creative artists do this in their work. And do you have anything more to add to what he said?
Yeah, so just the fact that he attuned and became the nature of a particle is fascinating. It becomes the transpersonal, where scientists go into the inner world to understand the greater reality. And then it's quite an informed way to speak about nature. I would give the Taoist quote, to understand emptiness, first you must become emptiness.
Exactly, yes.
And
I think, and haven't we heard that with a lot of people, Lorne? I think when you look at scientists, there are others that talk about the creative process being something where literally you become the object you want to understand at some deep inner level. And you literally in that process can then understand its inner mechanisms much, much more clearly and bring them out to other people.
Yeah, and actually, I want to share a real world example. So I met a scientist. His name was Tom Garrels. He was an astrophysicist. Early in my development in college, and I was actually the first time I even understood this was possible was because of him, because he was a famous astrophysicist. He was friends with Indira Gandhi, who would go to India to do astrophysics. His son did research on gamma ray bursts in the universe. He specifically studied asteroids, and he also worked with. He had a Guruji in India who he got really deep into meditation, and he was getting very good at meditation, where he could leave his body, and his Guruji Swamiji would help him leave his body through meditation. And he told me he would meditate and he would leave his body through here. He told me in person, he didn't bring it up in the class. And he said that he would go every morning and he would go into asteroids and he would study the asteroids through an experience. Mm-hmm. And then he said that one day he said he'd like to go to Venus, and he had actually went with Swami in an astral projection. So just leaving one's consciousness, experiencing something beyond reality. And then he would use that to inform his exploration of the universe. Very materialist science, recognized as a materialist scientist, not really vocally speaking about it, but sharing with me in person about his own understanding, where in a sense, the inner experience informed the outer experience. And we gain through our experience. Actually, I interviewed a famous Swami at Columbia. I say famous, I keep saying famous, but there was this Swami, Sri Tathata. He came to, he was living in India. He had 1 million followers. He came to Columbia University he spoke at the United Nations first, and then he spoke at Columbia University. I did an interview with him. And I asked him about the nature of the universe, so many different things. He had been living in a forest and he was leaving his body, similar to this idea of astral projection, non-local projection of the self. He said he was traveling to different worlds in his experience. very minimal food or water, almost no food or water. And I said to him very simply, after all those things, and I said, what is the truth?
Mhm.
And he said to me, the truth is an experience. So interesting.
That's good. And now we have 5 minutes left for any other questions people might have. So anyone else would like to ask a question? Todd? Yes.
I would just ask if it'd be possible to receive via email the paper you cited with photosynthesis in pigeon and the magnetic work. If that's a forwardable item, I would love to read it.
Yeah, I think it's just a philosophical possibility that quantum teleportation can exist, that we could one day transmit matter rather than just sending a bit of information through a vacuum state. We can put energy into the particle and send it to the other particle, and they can switch places. So it's just like a kind of a theoretical physics paper. I think it was in Physics Letters. Yeah, I can send it. It's very like Byzantine. Perhaps the gentleman who's the physicist will fully understand it.
Well, and Vasily, were you talking about?
Abstract.
Yeah, and was Vasily talking about some sort of a pigeon paper too? I can't remember, Vasily.
Oh yeah, there are many pigeon papers.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is that they all, what Lorne said, that it's, one thing is entanglement, trying to save reductionism. That you see this is in the brain, and there's this little thing that this gear which is entangled with the other gear, and then there's this other broader philosophical view that which Lorne has been pointing out, that has been kind of stripped away. But I could give you many references about the pigeon papers and about the photosynthesis
I would love to know
stuff.
about, yes.
Yeah.
Especially
But
the
the-
entanglement aspects. Thank you.
Yeah, but there was away the real stuff, the inner entanglement due to.
Okay, I'm going to send it to everybody, the citation.
Okay. And in fact, yes, and you can also perhaps, yeah, so there it is in the chat box that you can go ahead and copy it from the chat box.
Chat box, okay.
And Lorne, if you could go ahead and send the real paper, the PDF or whatever, to Deborah in the next few days, she might be able to send it to us, or at least send it to me, and I can forward it. So
Right.
that would be great. Thank you. Any
There were
other
a couple
questions before we leave?
I sent a couple questions in to Deborah.
Oh, that's right. And
She
so
forwarded them to you.
she did forward them to me. And my only question is, can you ask them yourself, or would you like me to go ahead and just open that document up?
I dare not open the screen where I've got.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to lose this.
All right, I'm going down. Here are the questions right now. I'm opening them up. Okay. So the first question is, for you, Lorne, Schrodinger thought the one great philosophical question that embraces all others was, who are we? Perhaps it is better to ask, what are we? Who seems to ask about us as individuals, whereas what asks about us generally as a life form? Yes or no?
Oh, so say the last part about.
Yes, so he's saying, is it really who are we, or is it what are we? Because who seems to ask about us as individuals, where what asks about us generally as a life form?
I think it's both. I think that's actually the inner and the outer. Who are we and what are we?
Mhm.
So what are we is this logical explanation, of reality, trying to describe the nature, the taxonomy of reality.
Mhm.
And then who are we is the individual question to understand one's identity. And then in essence, the who am I, it gives us the information to what am I. And so many spiritual practices start with that question, who am I?
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's read the work of Nisargati, I am that.
Sargadatta, yes.
Nisargata.
Yeah, definitely.
So I am that, where you ask the question, who is the voice speaking? Who is the voice of the I? And in such a way, Schrodinger was, alluding to that by asking the nature of I, the observer. The observer becomes the observed, and that's the nature of consciousness.
Yes.
So perhaps the deeper explanations lie in just the individual, where the hologram, the one, is the many. And then to look as the observed reality, to understand the taxonomy, the nature of reality, and that sets everyone up in a paradigm we're set up in a paradigm which is inherently limited. Every paradigm is broken. The geocentric versus heliocentric paradigm broken, but once explained as being fully espoused and backed by the society. So everyone at a time believed everything revolved around Earth, and it wasn't just a belief; it was the structure of science that supported it. I mean, the ellipses were explained. There was mathematical explanations. There was logical structures. This made sense. Everything revolved around the Earth. So that was an entrenched paradigm. Right now, we are within an entrenched paradigm because it's just scales of understanding. And I don't know if anyone's ever seen The Power of 10. It's this funny science documentary where we expand outward, and each perspective is one power of 10 greater, and we eventually get to the expanse of the universe, and then back to the infinitesimally small. But the point is that paradigms are like logarithmic scales for understanding, and right now, and you could even argue they're infinite. So if we're only one paradigm out from geocentric, what is 5 paradigms out from now?
That's a good question. I'm going to stop you there because I want to ask one last question since we're really out of time. And this is again from Gene. So he asks, the brain is part of he's quoting you now, the brain is part of a photonic information network connected to all parts of the world and the inner states of all human minds. And then he asks, why the limitations of the world and human minds? Humans aren't the only life form on Earth, and Earth isn't likely, hopefully, the only planet with life in the universe. So I guess you're asking, Gene, whether that really should be expanded beyond humans in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. I think, but of course, our understanding starts with our initial taxonomy for life on Earth and our mortality. Mm-hmm. I do 2 meditations when I work with people. One is just the best self, which is our mortality, and then the one is the love of the universe. So it's like where we extend beyond to something greater, something beyond ourselves. And it is all life and consciousness, all energy in the universe, ultimately. So yeah, I think that just saying that is just, the localized perspective, and then we go beyond to something greater on a scale, a power of 10 beyond, a paradigm beyond.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to say that we are out of time, but Deborah will be sending out notices, I think probably in the next month, about our next meeting in 2 months, which will be in September, and it will be Gary Schwartz talking about some of his research. And after the Gary Schwartz one, we're going to be moving to our new volume, AAPS Volume 3, with the essays of many of these scientists and academics about their own transformations. And I think Deborah will be sending out our PDF for that book, hopefully to you in the next week or so, something like that. So thank you all very, very much. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thank you, Lorne. Bye-bye.
Wish you luck with my pigeon.
Good luck with the pigeon, I was going to say. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
It's
Bye-bye.
local. It's local first. The pigeon is connected to everything, and I'm not. Where am I?
You are everything for the pigeon right now, so go ahead.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.